This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hey guys, Spencer Sakurai here, and in this video we're going to talk about on-camera monitoring. Specifically, we're going to talk about a few monitors that I recently tried out when I was trying to pick out one for my Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I kind of have a love-hate relationship with the monitor that I was using for my Ursa Mini 4.6K, which was the Atomos Shinobi. Now, I bought the Atomos Shinobi because it's a 5-inch monitor, it's lightweight, it had SDI ports on it, which was nice for the Ursa Mini 4.6K. Not something I need now on the Blackmagic Pocket 6K, but it seemed like the right choice at the time given its price and that it was basically a name brand monitor. Now, that monitor was around $400 and it had a 1000 nit brightness on it, so I could use it outside and not have any problems with viewing it in harsh sunlight. But there's one huge problem with the Atomos Shinobi, and that is the power button. I know that seems very silly. The power button is the reason that you wanted a new monitor. But listen, to go turn it on, all you have to do is just tap the power button on the back of the monitor and it kicks on the monitor. But when you go to turn it off, you have to hold down the power button for 4 full seconds before it'll turn off. And if you don't hold it down for the full 4 seconds, it actually locks the monitor and you have to start all over. Then you have to click it again, unlock the monitor, hold it down for 4 seconds. It takes forever. And then top it all off, when you do go to boot up the monitor, it kind of takes forever to boot up. And what happens is your brain's thinking, okay, I need to hold the button down in order to turn on the monitor because that's how you turn off the monitor. No, not true. So I always end up holding the button down and then the monitor doesn't even turn on. 3, 2, 1. Oh, I might have pressed it a little earlier. Anyways, I was getting really frustrated with it, and then B&H put out a monitor on their deal zone. It was a small HD 502 bright monitor for basically like 45% off. It's normally like $1,000 monitor and they were selling it for $570. So that's just a little bit more money than I paid for the Shinobi. It has 2 HDMI ports on it, 2 SDI ports on it, and I believe like a 1500 nit brightness. So it's a really bright name brand monitor. Now, Small HD is a monitor company that I've been using basically throughout my entire cinematography career. If I'm on set and I have a professional monitor, it's usually a Small HD. So I mostly trusted this brand already. It was very inexpensive because normally their monitors are a lot more expensive. So I thought I would buy it and try it out. I got lucky. I was one of the first people to buy it. And then right afterwards, it did go on back order. So if you're still looking for that deal, it might be hard to get that monitor now. So fast forward a week, I get my monitor, I start playing with it. I like the monitor a lot. I like the colors coming out of it. I like that I can do a pass through on the HDMI and SDI. So it's a really versatile, nice monitor. And it's not a touchscreen monitor like the Atomos Shinobi was, or a lot of monitors are now. It's a little bit of an older monitor and it actually doesn't have touchscreen control with it, which I was okay with because honestly getting, when you're using the touchscreen on a monitor, you tend to put fingerprints all over a monitor that you're using to view your images, and there's kind of a fine line there. Like, is the convenience worth having smudges on your image when you're watching the monitor? I don't know. I can go both ways. I like both ways. But on this one, it has a joystick and a button, so you can just slide through the menus really easily with a joystick. And I tend to really like that. I actually am a kind of person that actually likes buttons over touchscreens anyways. But then right as all this was happening, I'm finally got a new monitor. I'm settling in. I'm going to sell my Shinobi. And then my friend Easton Oliver, who you've seen on the channel before, he's been helping me a lot on these videos. He decides to buy the Portkeys BM5 monitor for his Pocket 6K. The reason the Portkeys BM5 monitor is interesting is that basically around the same price point as what I paid for the Small HD if you get the Bluetooth module with it. Now, what this Bluetooth module that comes with the Portkeys BM5 does is it actually gives you control over your Blackmagic Pocket 6K. This is kind of a game changer for this camera. If you've heard me talk about this camera before, it's basically a perfect camera other than the fact that it doesn't have an articulating screen. And the battery life kind of sucks. You can only access the controls in the Blackmagic Pocket 6K from the back, and you have a few buttons on top that you can lay out to have like some quick shortcuts. But it gets kind of annoying if you start putting a V-mount battery on the back of it and stuff like that, and you can't access the back of the screen very easily. You want to be able to change your controls easily, like if you're using like a Red, for instance, or maybe if you're using a lot of other cameras, they just have the controls on top, whereas this camera does not. So if you mount the Portkeys BM5 on top, it actually gives you Bluetooth control over the settings on the Pocket 6K, which is a really big deal. So this has me questioning everything. So what we thought we would do is we thought we would take the Portkeys and the Small HD and basically just put them together, compare them, kind of look at the image coming off the screen and to see if the Portkeys really does hold up even though it's on a name brand monitor. Now there's some even more advantages to the Portkeys. It actually is a 2200 nit brightness, so it's a super, super bright monitor. But before I just say that's a really good thing, let's talk about really bright monitors. So it's really nice to have a monitor that's bright enough to see in daylight, so you're outside. You don't have to have a sun hood to go on your monitor and you actually see your image. But what happens is when you start to get a really bright monitor, it starts to mess with the image a little bit. You have so much backlight and brightness coming off that monitor that you actually lose contrast on the screen. And you can see details in the shadows that normally you wouldn't see. So you might think that's a good thing. You know, it's like kind of feels like an HDR effect or something like that. You can see more of the image, you can see more of the detail. But actually, personally, when I've used bright monitors like that, it's kind of messed with my lighting ratios. I tend to underlight the shadows because it's brightening them so much on the screen. Now you can combat this obviously by just changing the settings on the screen, but then what's the point of having a 2200 nit monitor if you're just gonna lower the brightness on it anyways and then, you know, up the contrast? That's the thing too. The highlights tend to go a little bit, seem like they're gonna go faster too because it is just so bright. So you have to compensate a little bit for working with such a bright screen. Okay, but let's go back to the reason that we're even having this debate. So is the Small HD, the big name brand company, Small HD, they've been around a long time now, and you'll see them on a lot of major film sets. Is the screen actually better than this kind of off-brand monitor made by Portkeys? Okay, let's take a break real quick from the monitor comparison to talk about today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity. So if you're here or you're interested in my channel, I'm guessing that you're interested also in filmmaking and cinematography, and Skillshare actually has an entire section over this topic. There's a bunch of classes from, you know, color grading, cinematography basics, editing, all of that stuff is on here. There's lots of content on here about filmmaking. You know, but recently a class that's caught my attention is one that's about finding your style. It's a class by Andy J. Pizza. It's called Find Your Style, 5 Exercises to Unlock Your Creative Identity. Now, I find this interesting because I think it's easy for us as filmmakers to get caught up in new trends that are coming out and trying to recreate those trends. But this seems like a fun thing to take because it's about finding your own identity, about doing exercises based on taste, maybe some trendy stuff that you do like, or maybe some other stuff that you like, and then finding your own creative identity, finding basically your own style, basically making a style guide for yourself that you can implement onto your next project. Now, Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. The first 1,000 of my subscribers that click the link in the description will get a free trial of premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. I want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. So we set up the monitors side by side, kicked them both on with their stock, you know, calibration settings just to see what they look like side by side. So immediately you're going to notice that the Portkeys BM5 was brighter. It had less contrast, just like I was saying. And then the difference between the two right out of the gate for us, just on our calibration, obviously every monitor is calibrated differently. They're not going to be perfect. If you did the same test, it probably wouldn't be exactly the same. But what we did notice was that the Small HD was much more green than the Portkeys, and the Portkeys was actually much more magenta. It wasn't like either one of them really was in the sweet zone. They both kind of had their own tint settings on them, which you could obviously quickly change if you needed to. But you may not think to do that unless you were comparing it to another monitor or unless you calibrated the monitor yourself. So not a major deal, but we did take the two monitors outside to see what they would look like in broad daylight. They both seem to hold up very well in broad daylight, regardless that one was 2200 nits versus the 1500 nits. It didn't really make a difference to us. It seemed like, sure, the Portkeys was brighter, but that didn't seem to really change anything. All that really did was make us see into the shadows in a way that maybe we didn't want to see into the shadows. So if you want to just expose off of the monitor, I wouldn't really recommend it. I would rather just use the histogram or false color to really know what you're doing. Now, both these monitors are full professional monitors. They both have like all the same features in the settings that you might want from a monitor, you know, false color, waveforms, you know, anamorphic D-squeeze, all those things. They basically have the same stuff. The Portkeys might have a little more features just because it's kind of a more versatile monitor, but the upside is you can control the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Now, when we put the monitor on my camera, I haven't actually updated my camera recently, so it didn't quite work very well with it. It would change some settings, but it wouldn't really change all the settings. But I think if I would have updated my firmware, it would have. Easton's camera did have an updated firmware, and it seemed to be working pretty good on his camera. You could change the ISOs, you could even change your codec on there, you could change from 6K to 4K. I just want to mention that going forward that it can control the camera, but you have to remember it's just like a Bluetooth module. You know, it's just tapping into the Bluetooth on the camera and trying to control it itself. There are going to be some hiccups there, especially when there's new firmware updates and stuff like that. It's not made by Blackmagic, so this is never going to fully work perfectly all the time, but it definitely is way better than having to deal with a touchscreen on the back in a lot of scenarios. What's also cool about it too is that it's Bluetooth, so even if this monitor was like, 5 feet away on set, you could still be controlling the camera. So your camera assistant, if you have one of those, could control the camera, or if you had it on a gimbal, you could control the camera remotely, which is pretty nice. Something else that's really awesome about the Portkeys control is that you could actually control the autofocus on an autofocus lens. Now, the first time Easton tested this, it worked out pretty well, but now it seems to be, it was kind of having some hiccups where you'd have to like drag the slider and then the slider would pop back, but it would still get the focus there. You couldn't just like gradually change the focus. I think that maybe this was just like a firmware issue or something like that. I'm not totally sure. We didn't test it deep. Either way, I don't use autofocus lenses anyway, so it doesn't really matter to me, but it is kind of a fun feature to have if you wanted to. You could basically just touch to focus, find your focus really fast with an autofocus lens. Apparently too, the Bluetooth module can also control Tilta follow focuses like the Nucleus Nano and the Nucleus M, which would be kind of fun too if you were separate from the camera or you didn't have your wheel for some reason, your focus wheel, you could just actually use the monitor to do that. Both cameras can load LUTs onto them just fine. The one thing that was a little weird about them was the false color. The Small HD false color just looked a lot better and cleaner than the one coming out of the Portkeys. The Portkeys kind of had its own setup. You probably would want to maybe recalibrate the false color settings to fit your camera in the way you liked it. There's different versions of false color out there, and the one they were using just kind of looks funny in my opinion. And so this thing, you can get the BM5 monitor, but you have to get the Bluetooth module attachment. They do make a kit that has them both coming together. There's an antenna on top, and it also comes with a longer antenna. Also, the BM5 comes with its own little plastic Pelican case, which is nice, I suppose, if you want to protect it when traveling, whereas the Small HD did not, even though the Small HD is typically a more expensive monitor. But the Small HD did come with like a little case that can go around the monitor to kind of avoid scratches and stuff, which I may or may not use. I really haven't decided. So if you did take my advice recently and buy a Blackmagic Pocket 6K for your next cinema camera, I think I would recommend the Portkeys monitor just because you can control those settings from the monitor. Yes, it's not perfect, but it's something that is probably going to really benefit you and you're really going to like that from an ergonomic standpoint. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to send back my Small HD monitor to get the Portkeys monitor. I'm mostly using my Pocket 6K in a studio environment, so it's not a big deal for me with the touchscreen controls on the back. But if I was shooting more professional projects with the Pocket 6K, which I totally would if the opportunity came up, then maybe I would be more interested in the Portkeys monitor. But the Small HD just looks really nice. I really like the colors coming out of it. I really like the contrast that's already built into it. I'm just very familiar with Small HD because I've been using it for so long, so I'm probably going to keep it for now. Now, I believe Portkeys just announced this week another monitor. It's basically the same thing, just made out of cheaper plastic. And it's going to be a cheaper version of the BM5, so that might be something to look into as well. I have not tested that monitor. I just saw they just announced it, so maybe look into that if you need something a little bit more reasonable. Because the Portkeys does, with the kit, I think it's around $600. The Small HD is around $570, $600 basically as well. And I guess you could maybe use the Shinobi if you wanted to still, or like an Atomos Ninja 5, which is a really good deal because it does have the recording options, the external recording options built into a Ninja 5. But you are going to have to deal with that ridiculous power button on the Atomos because it's the same software. Well, this was just a quick video talking about my monitor conundrum and deciding between these two monitors, but I think I'm just going to keep my Small HD for now. But if you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you loved it, subscribe to the channel. And as always, I'm Spencer Sakurai. See ya.